everyone, welcome to Behavioral Finance video number 6. Today we are going to discuss an important concept, that is anchoring bias. In behavioral finance, we discussed different types of behavioral bias. Bias means a prejudice, that is a preconceived notion not based on actual experience. Anchoring bias is also a behavioral bias. It is one of the most prevalent and everlasting heuristics that decision makers usually face in their daily lives, particularly decisions under uncertainty. What you mean by heuristics? That is, it's a mental shortcut. That is, for quick decision making, we use common sense rule. It's an educated guess, or we can say rule of thumb, etc. Okay. When people are trying to make a decision, they often use an anchor or focal point as a reference or starting point. So we can say anchor is a reference point. That is, the people have a tendency to rely or depend too heavily on the first piece of information they learn. I will give you an example. Suppose you're searching for a new house in a new town, okay? While searching, a particular house catches your attention. Of course, the house is very attractive. Immediately you call the real estate agent and you realize that its rent is 7,000 per month. So this is the first piece of information you received, okay? So this is the reference point. This is the anchor, okay? Again, you find another property. So the first piece of information is in your mind, okay? The rent of the second property is rupees 5,000. Then what will you think? It is 2,000 less than the other property. Seems like a fair amount, right? Actually, you didn't have an estimate of how much the rents would be for properties in this area. So the initial value of rupees 7,000 acted as an anchor. It became a psychological benchmark. That is, it became the reference point through which you compared the rent for the second property. And you conclude that rupees 5,000 was a fair amount. I hope you got a clear idea about what is anchor. An anchor is a reference point, a rule of thumb, or a heuristic that is used by people when making decisions, but may not have any direct or indirect relevance to a decision. Okay. It's also called an information processing bias. It also suggests that people have a tendency to anchor on the first piece of information they receive. Anchoring or focalism is a cognitive bias where an individual depends too heavily on an initial piece of information offered to make subsequent judgments during decision making. In psychology, this type of cognitive bias is known as the anchoring bias or anchoring effect. Tversky and Kahneman found that even arbitrary numbers could lead participants to make incorrect estimates. I will give you another example. That is a number. That is an initial exposure to a number serves as a reference point and influences the subsequent judgments. Actually, this process usually occurs without our cognitive awareness. For instance, the credit card tip system operated in the New York taxis. It's an example for number anchoring. Under this system, the credit card system automatically suggests a 25% to 35% tip. So this range will act as a rule of thumb, okay? So this 25% to 35%, it acts as an anchor, okay? So by this rule of thumb, a 20% tip seems low and the passengers end up tipping 20% of the cab fare. But prior to this system, the average tips were only 8% to 10%. We can conclude, so anchoring is a behavioral bias in which we using a psychological benchmark. This benchmark generally takes the form of an irrelevant information such as an estimate or figure or event. Anchoring occurs when a person is influenced unconsciously by the initial piece of information, which in turn affects their final decision. Okay, that's all for today. In the next video, we would be discussing bandwagon bias, one of the important concepts in behavioral finance. Okay, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.